streaming. And then over here, there's a blue button I got to press, go live, which I just did. And now it says you're going live. So we're going live. So we're live right now. It's very confusing. I'm still very much an old man about this shit. But what the hell? Do you guys hear that? Oh my God.
No.
Okay, good. It was just coming through on my end, I guess. But anyway, we are live. So how's everybody doing tonight? We are back for part 8 of Rise of the Expert. This part is this is one of my favorite parts. I can't wait to talk about this because this is something that I've always kind of I've had a lot of guests come on and talk about education, homeschool, how we raise our kids and all these different things, and the rise of the university. This is really going to put things into perspective with so many of us who have just dealt with the public school systems or private sector in a negative way. But yeah, Duane, Andy, nice to have you here with us.
Glad to be here, buddy. Can't wait to get started. Part 8. Woo!
Gerard is finally back in the house.
Yes, glad to have everybody. You here, buddy.
Happy to be back. Thanks for having me.
Hell yeah, man. So yeah, without further ado, let's discuss let's give a little synopsis. What's going on tonight? The rise of the university.
Sure. Can you see that now?
Yes, sir.
Awesome. So we've been talking for 8 weeks about the rise of the expert, really, and so we told the story through Louis Dembitz Brandise, a U.S. Supreme Court justice, and we come to the rise of the university as a necessary aspect to the rise of the expert. And it makes sense when you start to look at it. The university system itself is really one giant expert, and it was established specifically for that reason, to become sort of a framework or an area of expertise. We look to the universities and our higher education institutions as a place, to tell us what's going on and what the truth is. And, during COVID, we saw that our elected officials had very little to do with what was going on, and they even were subjugated by the technical scientific expert. And so when you look at all of these guys, women, men that have been controlling the social engineers of our society for the last 100 years, they all come from the highest echelons of the higher education. So, Master of Arts degrees and Bachelor of Arts degrees. You look at the head of the CDC and all of these organizations and institutions, the administrative state that Louis Brandise built over 100 years ago, you can see that there's still the same education, the same knowledge still steering and controlling society as it was then. And now it's really perfected, and we'll get into the modern aspects and how it has grown and what it has grown into, because it's really pretty mind-blowing to go from the early beginnings of these things, the rudimentary start. They're using rudimentary instruments, and when compared to 100 years later, we're seeing the total advancement of all of these technologies, because idealisms, ideologues, philosophies, these are all technologies, just the same as something that we can put our hands on. And really what we're showing through this is these are the most influential of technologies, the ones that we can't see. So we start at the beginning with the university system and the word universitas, a number of persons associated into one body, a society, company, community, guild, or corporation. And I made corporation bold because it is a corporation. So we start to see alignments, paralleling of ideologies between corporations and countries. And so I just left a little reminder here in parentheses, talking about the Harvard and Yale corporations as the heart of the university system. Well, the corporation, the heart of each university itself, but Harvard and Yale corporations were the ones that funded Isaiah Bowman to go to Central and South America to investigate, all of the rock formations and everything down there. and he's on the group of people that rediscover Machu Picchu in 1911. And this is all funded by the corporations of these universities. Things that kind of surprised me when I started to look into this is that they're paying for investigations and explorers to go around the world, not just on this Western hemisphere, but all over the world. They're going at these moments in history where Machu Picchu is a good example, in that at that time there was just rumors and it was myth that there was this civilization of Incas, and so they sent down Isaiah Bowman at a good cost with his crew. Hiram Bingham was there too. So Hiram Bingham, he's like a double or triple Master of Arts degree holder. And Isaiah Bowman, he's a double Master of Arts degree, one at Yale, one at Harvard. So these guys are the most educated people that you will find. So
that's really interesting.
Yeah.
That they're
Anything
going after
anybody got to add?
Well, just the fact that they're going after, ancient civilizations like that. This is my fun area that I like a lot. So,
Right.
And I know that, ancient history has been curated very carefully in basically every category. Egypt, the Middle East, Machu Picchu is no different.
Yeah. And the rock formations down there, Lake Titicaca, and some of the designs that they've made in the dirt. I can't remember what the technical term is for them, but there's two separate places in South America, and Isaiah Bowman visited both, just trying to determine what the hell was going on.
Yeah, I know this isn't where we're going with this, but I'd be very curious what kind of conclusions he came to.
Yeah,
about I think you're referring to the Nazca lines in Peru, right?
Yeah. And then there's another one that's more prolific. There's one more down south near the desert of Atacama, and these are the things that
the Atacama. Yeah, absolutely. And there's a guy, there's like a figure down there that looks like a spaceman or something like that.
Yeah, and I've put that picture actually in one of my previous videos. And so that is what these corporations are doing. They're less interested in educating the youth, but they're far more interested in traveling the world, finding all the secrets of this environment that we're in. So it's an economic model. It's not a learning model. This is what we're going to learn here today, is it's really economic.
Yeah, it's treasure hunting.
Yeah, previously we discussed how the entire Western K through 12 education model and then the social sciences at large were introduced to American higher learning through Prussian technology, given to the founders of American sociology, economics, history, experimental psychology, and philosophy. And there's more too, but these are only the aspects we got into, and that is a large part of the social sciences. So these Prussian founded social sciences were grafted onto the American university model. At the same time, traditional curriculum consisting mostly of Latin, Greek, the classics, the hard sciences, and especially liberal arts were being removed from common education and placed only at institutions of the highest education. This movement, part of the broader establishment of a network of American universities during the second half of the 19th century, we call today the Association of American Universities. So this is the official name of it.
So liberal arts used to be taught in like K through 12, basically, not just at colleges and universities.
Yeah, it made up an essential part of the common education, common schools. Prior to Rockefeller's influence, we will get into that too here. I pull quotes out of some of these historical looks into this same era, and they're saying the same thing, that liberal arts was always a part of our education and always looked upon as a very valuable thing. But somewhere along the way, they've taken this out and put it at the highest echelon. So really it's lowered the bar and raised the bar at the same time, if you get me. If we know who Charlotte Iserbyt is, she wrote The Deliberate Dumbing Down of America, or John Taylor Gatto. He talks about how Prussian education model was brought over here. Some of the things we've been talking about in the last episode and throughout all of this.
And what you and I have talked about in previous episodes beyond Rise of the Expert, it was we've talked about how liberal arts at universities here, at least in America, as far as I've run into them and my friends have run into them, liberal arts is a you don't know what you want to do.
Yes.
It's a gutter major,
Yeah.
you know, which is at least that's the way it's looked upon.
Yep.
It's not
And I address
utilized or yeah.
Yep. And I address that in a little bit somewhere along in this story, because that is a
Excellent.
very important point to make, Andy. So there's an accompanying association of American state colleges and universities and the Association of American University Professors to go along with it. So it's one big unit. It's basically a professors union. So why was that created, you ask? To protect against the dismissal of men like John Dewey, Edward Allsworth Ross, Richard T. Ely, Charles Beard, and James Harvey Robinson. When you go look on the wiki page of the Association of American Universities, and they talk about the history and how it was established. Well, it was specifically because of those names that I just named, and they were highly controversial at Columbia, Stanford, and all these major universities, trying to infuse progressivism and this radical reform in, and they were kicked out. So what they do? They created a union to help, keep them in there. And so we start. This is, has to do with modern tenure. And who's the founder but John Dewey, one of the most controversial figures that there was during this time. He's the founder of pragmatism, right? And it's not by coincidence that one of them, his reputation is today still immersed in controversy because of this, this infusion of progressivism and radical new education into everything.
I've got to ask real quick, just for some perspective here. They got kicked out of these universities, we're saying. And they were the progressives. But if we look back in time, weren't these universities set up specifically, these foundational centers of learning set up by these very same people? Now, before we get into that real quick, just some perspective. It's like we have a lot of controlled opposition tactics, like, get banned and you're automatically the hero. So, I'm shadow banned. Like, if you're not shadow banned, you're a Fed. You know what I mean?
Right,
that kind of behavior, that kind of attitude. So it's like, this is the same, what we've talked about many times. Like, it's The Departed. It's Leonardo DiCaprio. He can't be a state trooper. He's got to go into prison, come out, and be a fucking rat. Yep. Just wanted to.
And I would add to that those men that were highly controversial ended up being the fathers of all of these things. John Dewey is a name that everybody recognizes as an education reformer. He's a massive influence on Western education, experimental psychology, our world today. So despite all the controversy, I think what's happened is that everything's been normalized, like the Frankfurt School coming over to Columbia and becoming the new school. Well, now it is its own giant mechanism and taking up, expensive real estate in downtown New York. It's become its own monster. And you see that here, that they borrow from the Prussian model, but then it becomes its own American monster throughout the 20th century. And that's really what we're fighting against today, sort of the culmination of all of that.
Yeah, I see what you're saying, how it's like progressed and changed, literally progressed.
Yeah, right.
And shout out to everybody in the chat. What's up? Mario Garza from Symbolic Studies is hanging out with us.
Oh, cool.
Once again, he loves this series. He was
Cool,
praising
man.
it when we talked on our recent episode. And if you haven't listened to that, everybody go check that out. But so let's continue on here. This is going to get juicy.
Yeah, so we're talking about medieval universities, right? So as early as the 1840s, we see evidence of a move toward the creation of a network of higher learning centered around the liberal arts. In Illinois, we see the first legislature to petition Congress for federal land grants. Michigan, Massachusetts, and many states then followed. Final resolutions in the state of Illinois stated, whereas the spirit and progress of this age and country demand the culture of the highest order of intellectual attainment in theoretical and industrial science. So you can see it's in their in their language. It's all about progressive education, new education. So the basis of education in the early Middle Ages consisted, as we have seen, of the so-called 7 liberal arts. three of these, grammar, rhetoric, and logic, were grouped as the trivium. So he's mentioning the trivium here. The remaining four, arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, and music, made up the quadrivium. So those are books I have on my bookshelf right behind me. These are very important. And Charles Homer Haskins is a member of the Inquiry. So he's really on the board of governors, figuring out what they're going to teach secondary schools as far as history goes across the nation. So this guy knows, and he's a child protege. I think he graduated Harvard when he was 16, but this is why he was part of the Inquiry and went to the Paris Peace Conference, was critically important there too. And we're going to learn more about him in part 9.
Excellent.
So these are, I'm taking quotes from him, and he's written a book called The Rise of the Universities. And so we find it very accurate, and we find that source totally reliable. And I would consider, this close to a primary source. I mean, this guy is helping establish it all.
Yeah.
Necessary weapon, really. I mean, for these people, right? Absolute weapon needed for these people to get the bulk majority of us churning through, going there and leaving, feeling accomplished, feeling confident, feeling that more, and you're better than. I remember graduating college and thinking that I was smarter and more intelligent
than your brothers,
than people around me that didn't go to college or something. And just almost getting a job in corporate America and sort of, not in a hubristic way looking down on people, but in a way looking down on the factory worker, or thinking that I was cultured and I was part of high society or something. And it's indeed, it's designed to leave that impression with the people going through there. And it was just it was one of the worst financial decisions I've ever made in my life, till this day, still paying $500 a month since 2008. Now that's 16 years. I still owe $40,000. And
that's incredible.
Basically I learned how to be a drunk, how to chase girls, how to be a bullshit artist, but I didn't learn anything about logic and how to form a reasonable, articulate argument,
beautifully said, man.
A bulletproof argument, if you will. I didn't learn any of those things. And I mean, just look at the dialogue and the discourse that we have out there, in the social media realms. It's especially during the whole COVID madness. I mean, was there ever a better indication or example of the lack of logic?
Yeah,
I mean,
totally. Yep, totally. Good point. It was it went out the window.
It was just a shining example of how they, using fear and using emotional manipulation, to steer people in that direction. But it's at the heart of this is these university systems. It's just giving people the impression that they're somehow more established, more intelligent than the average person on the street that has life experience, real world life experience. It's just ridiculous.
I would also just like to add too that a lot of us that never graduated college, but that at that age were obsessed with all of these intellectuals anyway. That's a whole other sector that gets dragged in, the fake bourgeois, it's just unreal. We all sat around at bookstores and worshiped at the feet of Aldous Huxley and all these other hucksters,
Yeah, I agree. One of the things that I want to make sure that everybody gets here too is what they did with the liberal arts and how they created a two-caste system. And you're talking about what you learn from universities, and you end up leaving there not as smart as you thought. And so liberal arts was taken from, or common school or general education and put at the higher levels, at the highest level, really, because of its value and because it can empower the individual. And they recognize that just the same as they recognize all of the other influences or the positive influences, for the individual. And we talk about that a little later, like, free market and the power of cash and all of these things that actually, help give power to the individual. You can see there's a systematic deletion of all of them, and they get bigger and bigger and bigger. So the occasion for the rise of universities was a great revival of learning, not the revival of the 14th and 15th centuries to which the term is usually applied, but an earlier revival, less known though in its way quite as significant, which historians now call the Renaissance of the 12th century. So as long as knowledge was limited to the 7 liberal arts of the early Middle Ages, there could be no universities, for there was nothing to teach beyond the bare elements of grammar, rhetoric, logic, and the still bare notions of arithmetic, astronomy, geometry, and music, which did duty for an academic curriculum. Now, he's speaking somewhat negatively of the liberal arts, I would say, but I think he's even a double Master of Arts holder. And sort of going back to what you said earlier, Rouse, there's a negative connotation surrounding this, just the same as there's negative connotations around, Latin or the truth. Or God.
Business majors had almost no respect for like liberal arts students.
Yeah, right. Liberal arts is a joke. It's a punchline.
That's right.
From the 90s,
finance majors, and like I was a finance major, right? And that's so laughable. We've talked about this before, like being a finance major and not knowing that the Federal Reserve wasn't federal and had no reserves.
Right.
But I mean, that in and of itself is a whole podcast, right? Not knowing that, being 4 years of finance study at a major university in Connecticut, and I didn't know it wasn't federal. There are no reserves. It's run by private bankers, but that's a whole nother podcast. But business majors, we used to just laugh at liberal arts majors.
Yeah.
We just thought it was a joke that they wouldn't be able to find a job anywhere.
Right.
But
everything starts with liberal arts. All communication starts there.
Yeah. A lot of people that I ended up working with at these large corporations were like history majors or like, liberal arts majors. They were ended up being like accountants or something. So, I mean, it's
if groomed the right way, or dare I say, just like positioned the correct way, liberal arts can be extremely helpful because the trivium, it's like literally triangulating your life goals. It's a triangulation on life and observation of your surroundings, and I could go on and on, which we won't.
And hey, you know what there's going to be, the next part is going to be on that, because in this one we've identified what they removed and why, then we better start to understand the importance of it and why it is that they felt it necessary to remove it. So
remove it and still keep it for themselves. Because if you look into all these people, they're all liberal arts majors. We're going to get into that.
That's a great point. They use it. What they've done, and that's what I wanted to say earlier, is that they've used K through 12 and secondary education as a filter system to find out who's the best regurgitators and repeaters, and then those people go on to scholarships and receive the Master of Arts degrees because they've proven themselves to be worthy of the management class. Noam Chomsky, as much as you want to trust that guy, he was right when he looks at the 2 caste system that we have, 20% managerial and then the 80% of us. And, that 20% of managerial class is largely made up of Master of Arts degrees. So they covet, they identify the people that they want to use. We've talked about this before, that they become the tools of the trade. Right. A liberal artist can walk this earth and make a living, live a life without actually holding a tool, but they can use people as tools, and that's what's happening. So university system, this was something that surprised me too, is that it was an essential part of early cities. You can see here in Paris and Cologne, I think, we're going to get into it here. One of them in Italy, but Paris and that one are the first real modern universities. This is where they trace it all back to. And you can see this, medieval Paris universities take up the whole, bottom half of that.
It's like the beating heart.
Yeah, exactly.
Think about how all the supplies, the food, everything that goes into a university. I mean, that town is, and when you think about it, even today, I'm right next to a college town, right? And you can see the difference. It's a major difference. Like we're in the suburbs and it feels like a city because of that,
Yeah. And you being in Boston, that's
near Boston,
Harvard, Cambridge, MIT, they're all going to have the same thing. And, Boston's an I don't know if it's probably the biggest university or college city that we have. Harvard's been around forever. It's been around for 100. We talked about this last time, for nearly 200 years before there was even an America.
Yeah. It's so messed up. It's so dark. And it's all in my backyard too. Yeah.
Right. That's
mine
exciting.
too.
Right.
We have the same backyard.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Are you back up here, Andy?
No, I'm still in Charlotte, but
yeah. No, your heart's up here. I know.
yeah, it is. It is up there.
Okay, so medieval universities. Universities like cathedrals and parliaments are a product of the Middle Ages. The Greeks and the Romans, strange as it may seem, had no universities in the sense in which the word has been used for the past 7 or 8 centuries. They had higher education, but the terms are not synonymous. Much of their instruction in law, rhetoric, and philosophy, it would be hard to surpass, but it was not organized into the form of permanent institutions of learning like we have today. So these are excerpts from The Rise of the Universities, Charles Homer Haskins. Only in the 12th and 13th century do there emerge in the world those features of organized education with which we are most familiar, all that machinery of instruction represented by faculties and colleges and courses of study, examinations and commencements and academic degrees. In all these matters, we are the heirs and successors, not of Athens and Alexandria, but of Paris and Bologna. So that's from page 3 and page 4. And so I went and substantiated that. That is just a general documented historical reality, is that the modern universities really come out of Italy and Paris. So we were talking about Prussia, but this is all related. So there's another image just showing. I'm not sure what time period this is. It's just another indicator of Paris and showing that there's universities involved here. And so the students, you think about the income that universities would have in and around the city, because these students have to eat and all of those things and pay rent. So, the university really at that point was to, again, create security or safety in numbers, because the students would go to this place of higher learning and they would get gouged. There would be locals profiteering from these students. And so this was kind of the motivation of all of these students to get together, and because they brought so much influence to a city. And so they were able to sort of turn that into some influence in what was said and what was done in that city. So the contrast between these earliest city universities and those of today is, of course, broad and striking. Throughout the period of its origin, the medieval university had no libraries, laboratories, or museums, no endowment or buildings of its own. It could not possibly have met the requirements of the Carnegie Foundation, is what he says. So he's working with Carnegie. He's working with Rockefeller. He's deep in here. He knows exactly what's going on. And, there has to be certain stipulations for a 401 or 501c not-for-profit to get involved. And so it's going to have laboratories and museums and look like a modern established university. And really what they're doing is widening, they're bringing in more subjects and, broadening the aspect of learnable fields of study. So almost burying liberal arts in a large, mass of education.
They're compartmentalizing things.
Yeah, they bring in all of the libraries and laboratories are really the rise of the research university. Major
key factor in all of this.
Yeah, and this
as we
really
progress.
And all of these are research laboratories. Really, that's it first started Chicago University with John Dewey creating these laboratories, and Johns Hopkins University. And so they started making laboratories all over. And so that is social science research. When we start to look at that, the study of society or sociology,
Study of us.
the study of us for sure. So the medieval university was, in the fine old phrase of Pasquier, built of men. Such a university had no board of trustees and published no catalog. It had no student societies, except so far as the university itself was fundamentally a society of students. No college journalism, no dramatics, no athletics, none of those outside activities, which are the chief excuse for inside inactivity in the American college.
Right.
So all of these peripheral things come along later. Really, the university, I think in its first established rendition, was beneficial.
Sounds like it
sort
was.
of where I
And
am right
then-
now with it. But I think like all of our technologies, it was kind of taken over. I'm seeing a little bit of that too.
Seems like this is a running theme no matter where you look. There was once this, you
Yep.
know,
This is progressivism.
it ruins everything.
Well, it replaces everything for sure.
Yeah.
And it's done by social reformers, radical social reformers like John Dewey and all of these guys. So
Mm.
maybe once
So-
they like groomed the managerial class and got this thing really rolling, they kind of identified like a need to create all these additional distractions and activities to create more people who would be distracted, less focused,
that's exactly it.
and to go on to become the working class. So
Well-
like as society expands, as the population grows, their managerial class is kind of set, because in the beginning, this system was beneficial. It was teaching them all these like very very deep, knowledgeable things about the world, about how to think, about how to make arguments, technical skills. And then that managerial class gets locked in. We see the nepotism that exists with actually running these companies that, you know, drive society and stuff like that. So maybe that's kind of part of it, right? But like they had to realize like, okay, we have to get more people to work because there's more people now. We got the managerial thing locked down and in place. We got our buddies here. We'll pass it on to our children, our cousins, this, that, and the other.
Mhm.
And then, okay, there's more money to be made. There's more people. So there's more things to study, more things about people to study.
Yep.
And that's kind of how I almost see part of this too, is like, as it grows, the managerial class locked in. Now let's get them distracted with sports and all this other bullshit that means nothing and that most people care more about than anything else today. You know,
It's just
myself
theater for
included.
war. You know, it's
Yeah.
like it's practice for war. It's just that whole, yeah.
Yeah, and you think about what they're doing. They're creating the administrative state. You know, they're trying to have a technical scientific expert at the top of every form or aspect of our society, whether it's an intellectual or military or social education. And so they're expanding, you know, the world of education. So they are then going to have to educate the next generation of teachers, exactly like you say, so that they can manage the next generations of societies after. And really what they establish are the institutions. It comes from these guys' minds, and then they establish the institutions. And once they're up and running, they're like a perpetual motion machine, I call them. And this is what the university does. They take, and we'll get into it here in a sec, the land grant, and they use this land and they start to sell it off to create rent and revenue for the university. And part of the stipulation is that it never, ever dies, that it's never diminished, that the university bankroll is always full, and they're always moving forward and developing, you know, more institutions and new departments. And so,
Yep.
and yet, as great as these differences are, the fact remains that the university of the 20th century is the lineal descendant of medieval Paris and Bologna. They are the rock whence we were hewn, the hole of the pit whence we were digged. The fundamental organization is the same. The historical continuity is unbroken. They created the university tradition of the modern world, that common tradition which belongs to all our institutions of higher learning, the newest as well as the oldest. So there he is. He's saying it right there. University was a necessary aspect to early Paris and economic provider. So here's a map also of, all of the earliest medieval universities. So this is really where it all comes from, right? Europe. And here's the area that we've been kind of focusing on here. You can see the early ones and the dates. So they've been, there's Bohemia, Prague. This is where Brandise comes from, 1347. Their university is set up. So America's really learning from these big brothers and people that have been doing it for hundreds of years and controlling their society through intellectual means. Really, probably, I would say, even back then, there's a managerial class, just as the Romans and, before them, there's a managerial class. There's a class of opinion leaders or thought leaders, that steer society just the same.
The church, I mean.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. It's like internationalists are coming from this area of the world where you can drive 30 minutes and be in 6 different countries.
Right.
I mean, and we're here over here in Canada and America. We have these massive areas that are, all different, but are all supposed to be part of the same. We don't need passports in America, really.
Right. Right. Exactly. Not yet.
And it's pretty normal. And it's pretty normal for someone in that's born in France to speak 4 different languages too. So it's you have that aspect of it too. And I mean,
same with
look at us in America, it's you travel, a trip from Massachusetts to, Maryland or Georgia, you're covering, 1,000 miles or whatever, or 1,500 miles. You're not, you're going through a few different, dialects and a few different accents or whatever, but you basically understand the language that's being spoken. But you travel that same distance, you could be in 3-4 different countries in Europe, and it's holy shit.
Mm-hmm.
It's crazy.
So as I was saying earlier, the first universities created as a security measure, a student collective organized against the townspeople for the prices of rooms and necessaries rose rapidly with the crowd of new tenants and consumers, and the individual student was helpless against such profiteering. United, the students could bring the town to terms by the threat of departure as a body. And there are many historical examples of such migrations. Better rent one's rooms for less than not rent them at all. And so the student organizations secured the power to fix the prices of lodgings and books through their representatives. So University Student Union, right? The firsts. So again, through nice sounding words, this is another key thing is we're showing here in the 10-part series that it's all through nice sounding words, things that sound good. So it's, we have to refine our discernment, and where do we get that from but the trivium? So they instituted a giant network of mind control, a system of standardization directly opposed to human betterment behind a scholastic paywall. Those key intellectual technology once taught in our common schools and the common senses, you could say, because that's what makes up, the fifth side of the longest side of the right triangle that is the basis of the trivium, the 3, 4, 5. Makes up our 5 senses. Well, the 3 makes up the trivium, grammar, logic, rhetoric, and the 4 makes up the quadrivium. So it's the common senses we see being targeted.
Oh, yeah.
The system first founded in Bologna and Paris, still today the predominant system, but the direction of teaching has drastically changed with the inclusion of the social sciences. Today, when it comes to the university, at least, tradition is embraced. And the oldest universities carrying with them the most prestige. And I put in their parentheses the definition to trick or fool. So this is part of what you guys were talking about earlier about getting a university education, and you come out of there thinking maybe you have the moral and intellectual high ground on everybody. It's because we believe in this prestige. And, even looking at the top 20 American universities today, the latest, website 2024, they'll use that word.
Mm.
A system of academic freedom and institutional autonomy, still the prevalent characteristics of a university mission statement. In 88, to mark the 900th anniversary of the founding of the first modern university in Bologna, the Magna Charta Universitatum was created and is signed by over 975 universities from 94 countries around the world, and still stands today as the final text and the spirit behind the university. So they're updating this as they go. We've got more updates than that, I'm sure. 1994, actually, there was the third establishment of the land grants. This is really where the universities come from, and we're going to get to that right now. But first, sort of what the trivium was. I just want to introduce people quickly so you can look at these two diagrams. It's grammar, logic, rhetoric, and you can see yourself in the middle by asking the proper questions. You gain a knowledge from understanding that turns into a wisdom. And this is really the fundamentals of all thought. And this is what has created the lack of this in our general population has created our caste system, really. I mean, it's coincides with the Industrial Revolution. So we've got a wealth gap created at the same time we were creating a knowledge gap. And you can see how it confounded us, compounded, almost exponentially. 100 years later, we see just the control and the ignorance of our general public. They've never heard of the trivium. They've never heard of grammar, logic, rhetoric. But in the other diagram here, it shows all of the logical fallacies and the ways that they lie to you. So this is probably the most empowering information one can have, to find out to be able to tell when you're being lied to or somebody's being dishonest is very powerful. So the university itself, the entering wedge, just like the labor union, similar to the labor union, only in the intellectual form, between us and the most empowering, freeing information, both used to create a two-class society of the conscious and the unconscious, our ability to communicate with each other, our ability to discern through the development of our own senses, to know when others are being dishonest, disingenuous, or straight up lying to us. All learned skills of logic and deduction, and all were systematically removed in the name of standardization. This is the word that they use. They tell people that the education system is going to get better, and it's going to be through standardization. Well, that's removing free will in the soil, just like Johann Fichte wanted in the Prussian Reformation, 1800s. So just as there was proclaimed a death of God, and then the truth, then Latin, then the liberal arts, then our free will, then the free market, now our gut feelings, in other words, our common senses, were pronounced dead too. These, not by coincidence, are some of the most empowering aspects to the sovereignty of an individual. We think about cash, what was going on during COVID. Well, they want to get rid of cash, right? Well, what is that? That's our ability to earn money without being taxed. So hard measurable science is replaced by soft sciences, once thought to be pseudoscience. Now, I lived in the 70s and the 80s, and even then, 80 years after the establishment of some of these things, they were still looked at as pseudoscience, psychiatry, psychology, because you can't measure anything. So it's really determined by the minds of men what is important. So, you end up getting things like the IQ test, the intelligence quotients, which really isn't a good measure of intelligence, just, our ability to follow, really.
Right.
So the domination of the natural world and our human nature was the goal. So all nature is the enemy to these guys, and especially our own human nature.
As always, we come to this point about them being against nature and trying to replace it completely.
One common theme, man, is they all hate nature. They all despise natural law.
And I don't think they would recognize this in themselves. Some of them, they would say, no, of course not.
Right.
And then there's the argument that we are nature, and everything we do and whatever we decide is also nature.
Yeah, that I've seen like modern singularity, like scientists, they're pushing singularity in AI. They'll say that outright. I hate nature. So I don't know what that means, but
some of those people are far out there and will do that. Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe because they're supposed to be
AI, transhumanism.
Maybe because there's not really any contradiction in nature. Maybe that's why. So the Managerial land grants. Have you guys heard of these? 1862 and 1890. This
No,
is,
we never learned
I'd
about
never
this in
heard of it
school.
before, but this is where universities come from. Okay. So I will say this too, that the owner of the House of Truth, 40 years after this, he was the head of Indian relations under Taft before he left there and started the House of Truth. And, they established the whole progressive movement on the dining room table there. So there's a relation here, but it's a little earlier before his time, but you can see that he's taking up the torch from things pioneered in these days. So probably more than any other single factor, the land grant college idea has brought about the tremendous advance in agricultural efficiency. Great agricultural efficiency has made possible the industrialization of the United States through the release of agricultural workers to industry, and therefore our highly diversified and productive and powerful economy. So I've got the provenance there, Roland Rene, but I highlighted agricultural because this move is really based in agriculture. So when you understand the General Education Board and what they said about the establishment of K through 12, agriculture and schooling for the South and the blacks were the number one or number two and number three reasons. There was three. And so here again, we see them sort of congregating around agriculture and wanting to make it efficient. So what I'm seeing here is, they want to make, if this progressive movement is going to hit, and we're early here, but definitely progressivism is going on. The progressive era is much longer than just 1910 to 1912. It happened a lot earlier than that. I would even include Lincoln in this, and the emancipation of the slaves as part of the progressive movement.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And
that
so,
could be an entire episode too.
Yeah. And so agriculture is the one thing I want to establish here, is that they're now going to go around the country and teach farmers how to grow things more efficient in the name of strength of the state. So we have utility and using people for an ends and means, right? This is really how they started to get the people off the farmlands. So at mid-19th century, approximately 80% of the United States' workforce were farmers and artisans. Dissatisfied with the classical education offered at liberal arts colleges, educational and political reformers determined that colleges should provide practical learning for the agricultural and mechanical industrial arts. So practical means pragmatic. It's the same thing. Make good works. Ends justify the means. So you see paralleling of the ideologies, the things that we can't see once we can start to identify through language. These guys are speaking the same language as those guys that are speaking the same language as those guys. The gig is kind of up. We can start to see right through them. So here again, we see them talking about liberal arts. They're naming the liberal arts here. So the Morrill Land Grant Acts of 1862 and 1890, and later 1994 is the third one in Dakota with the native Indian. So they were a response to the Industrial Revolution, and their mission was to provide for the more liberal and practical education of our industrial classes and their teachers. So we were talking about a wider breadth of education, more courses, more fields of study. So its mandate also focused on agriculture science, military science, and the mechanical arts, which is engineering here. They use the term mechanical arts. This is what the A&M means in Texas A&M, agriculture and mechanical arts. Now, did you guys know that?
Nope.
I did not.
I did, but only because I lived in Texas and I totally had friends going there.
Yeah, it was a shock to me. Oh, would you look at that? Agricultural and mechanical arts. And those are two major aspects to this Association of American Universities. So this is an historical moment in that it marks the first federal funding of institutions of higher learning. Now, there were federal funding of institutions of higher learning prior to that, but this is systemic, and they're going across the nation in a deliberate attempt to just totally standardize and systemize the whole thing. So, sponsored by Senator Justin Morrill, serving on the House Committee of Agriculture and Committee on Territories. Morrill became convinced that more should be done to place the nation's farming on a scientific basis. So they are starting to create, Hegelian dialectic problem reaction solution. So land was taken from Native American tribes, ceded through treaties, agreements, seizures, and under threat of violence. And there was violence. There was deaths in all of this. And in many of these agreements, the federal government did not uphold its end of these treaties. It was a movement in complete contrast to the traditional education practiced up until this point, centered on liberal arts curriculum. So there they are, National Archives, milestone documents, Rural Act. They're mentioning liberal arts and the scientific and scientific farming. We're talking about the scientific expert. Here it is in our agriculture.
Mm-hmm.
So within the Act of 1862, it states, and I've got it here, you can zoom in, I've got some of that underlined, that it's donating public lands to the several states and territories, that there be granted to the several states an amount of public land equal to 30,000 acres, that all the expenses of management, superintendence, and taxes from data selection of said lands previous to their sales, and all expenses incurred in the management and disbursement of the monies which may be received therefrom shall be paid out of the treasury of the state. So that's just saying that all of the expenses of the university is going to be paid for by the state. So where the leading object shall be, without excluding other scientific and classical studies. So they're saying that they're still involved, classical studies and scientific studies. They're going to still be a part of it, but nowhere near as prominent as they were, and including military tactics to teach such branches of learning as are related to agriculture and the mechanical arts. So we're still in utilitarian arts, right? Servitude arts.
Right.
Still, people are largely being used for the ends of the state. So
and just as I was saying earlier, how like it looked like the beating heart of old Paris, it's sucking the life, or it is the life force of the entire operation, the whole city itself. It sounds like they're literally stating that's what they're for.
Yeah.
Or that's what they do. That's like, they're basically,
that's their job.
Claiming superiority over all other aspects of life.
Yeah.
Using nice words and good ideas. The ends justify the means.
Yeah, right. You're getting it, man. I love it. So in order to promote the liberal and practical education of the industrial classes in the several pursuits and professions in life, if any portion of the fund invested be diminished or lost, it shall be replaced by the state to which it belongs, so that the capital of the fund shall remain forever undiminished. So they're parceling off their land. They got 30,000 acres at least. Cornell was more than that. I mean, it takes up a large section of the state of New York. Mm-hmm. And practical education, industrial classes, and a fund that should never be diminished, because they're going to parcel off that land and rent it and make income to start just becoming self-sufficient as a university. This is really what it is. The federal government, established it all. So then subsequent related acts allocated more federal funding for each state. The Hatch Act in 1887, $15,000 per year, $15,000 per year, 1887. The Morrill College Aid Act of 1890, $25,000 per year. This is going to every single university. The Adams Act of 1906, $30,000 per year and $50,000 per year from the Nelson Act of 1907. So that's on top of what they're already making from being landlords. So it's about, they said here the property held for the benefit of these institutions amounted to 113 million in 1862. And I just did a quick calculation. It's $500 million today.
Jesus.
No, it's exorbitant amounts of money, but it's the federal government sending money through each state, donating the land upon which the universities are going to be established, this entire network of higher learning.
Right.
So the federal gifts for expenses, buildings, and other special purposes amounted to 8 times the value of the income from the proceeds of the original land grant. So if we compare, and we see that today, they don't pay labor for their football players, yet there's 80,000 people filling a stadium and buying beer and doing all those things. You imagine how much money they make not having to pay their athletes millions of dollars.
Right.
So
they'll pay the coaches millions of dollars.
Right.
They do that.
Right. So if we compare the total income of all these institutions from all sources with the income direct and indirect from federal sources, the disproportion is still more striking. The federal grant for this purpose has clearly proved a great stimulus to the individual states and to private citizens. The university becomes a federally funded perpetual profit machine, fueled forever by benefits accrued from dispossessed native land. They just took it. So you want a picture of the rise of the expert? I would say in graph form. This is
Yeah,
it,
right there.
right?
That is beautiful.
We got undergraduate, graduate. This is students in either 2 or 4 year institutions in the United States. Now that because they're 2 and 4 year terms, that qualifies as higher education. I think that at least back then, I'm not sure what it is now, but if it was just a 1 year course you're taking, it doesn't necessarily constitute higher education. It had to be from 2 or 4 year. And so you can see 18 to 21-year-olds from 1890 to 1970 being, enrolling in it in universities. So we were born into a world where, a university education is what everybody pursued. White picket fence, 2.5 kids, right? 2.5,
Right.
2-car garage.
What did I send you guys in the chat that it was a graph of the world IQ, and it was basically the complete opposite, right? Where I was like, I basically said, like, as the more experts that we see, the lower and lower and lower our IQ becomes. Like, it's just on a downward, like that same trajectory, but on a complete downward scale, like the
directly
world IQ.
Disproportionate.
Yeah, that's the word I was looking for.
The gatekeeping itself, it's everywhere, and it permeates everything. You work with people that are above you, right? And a lot of times they're good leaders, and they want to teach you and everyone else everything they know, because then your whole workforce gets stronger, right? Because people can fill in, people can grow.
Yeah. Right.
And then there's the other types of leaders that just are out for themselves, and they keep all that information tight to the chest, and act as this intellectual or this expert per se, and this is kind of the encouragement of that whole mentality.
It kind of comes out of the insecurities too, when you have to control everything, right?
It's
Us
always
at the farm.
yes.
The first thing I do, man, and it's the first thing I did with Carrie when she came aboard, was just try to teach her everything I know and not overburden her.
Right.
Just to start in on one day, but as much as she could handle, I wanted to teach, because I want to be able to walk away from the farm and trust that it's in good hands. But I also want her to look at the farm with my eyes and my ears, and be able to hear things that aren't there that should be, and hear things that are there that shouldn't. There's like you say, there's 2 forms of leadership, and I'm a big believer in making sure that everybody around you is better than you. That would be the perfect scenario. Everybody around you being better than you.
Right. Damn right.
So the Association of American Universities is developed. So this is different than the land grants, but the same. It's just kind of like the new name for it. So the Association of American Universities was founded in February 1900 at a 2-day conference that 14 of the nation's leading PhD granting institutions held at the University of Chicago. So it's like Harvard, Yale, Columbia. It's all the Ivy Leagues, and then 5 others or whatever. It's your most prestigious universities creating this Association of American Universities, 1900. So, this is a modern creation. This is really where all of the laboratories and all of the libraries and everything starts to be packed into the university. We've shown in the last one, the sociology departments, and we referred to the psychology departments, but there's also history departments being created. Economic departments, all the social sciences are really just flooding into this university system. So the idea for the conference came from the University of California president, Benjamin Ide Wheeler, who had been proposing the formation of something like the AAU in correspondence with Harvard president Charles Eliot and others. The purpose of the organization, in the words of the Constitution that was adopted at the Chicago conference, was to consider matters of common interest relating to graduate studies. So they're trying to figure out the system that they want to have, and then they're just going to make it a blanket system, right? Just general across the board, and make it consistent, standardized. This is the whole game plan. So, whereas a system of industrial universities, and that was the first time I'd heard that term, but it makes sense when we're going towards an industrial democracy to have industrial universities, right? Feeding that system. This is where we're educating people just enough to run the machines. We've heard that trope, that cliche said for a long time. Well, this is what we're showing. This is where it happened.
Mm.
So liberally endowed in each state of the union, cooperative with each other and with the Smithsonian Institute at Washington. So that's part of this whole development. Would develop a more liberal and practical education. So there again, they're using that exact term among the people, tend to more intellectualize the rising generation and eminently conduce to the virtue, intelligence, and true glory of our common country. Therefore, be it resolved, the passage of a law of Congress donating each state in the Union an amount of public lands not less in value than $500,000 for the liberal endowment of a system of industrial universities, one in each state in the Union, to cooperate with each other for the more liberal and practical education of our industrial classes and their teachers. That is a major quote, just basically laying it out that this is what it is. You know, how often are people going to be reading these quotes? How often are the general public going to be going in there and, you know, referencing this stuff? Very low percentage. You know, they're talking in these books and passing these books along to each other.
Ooh, big shout out to Mario. Thank you, sir. Coming in with the super chat, man.
Cool. So the founders had quite specific matters in mind. In the quarter century before 1900, American higher education had begun transforming itself using the German university model, which emphasized advanced study and laboratory research. So this is where they infused the Prussian model. This is where all the laboratories and everything come from. So prior to this, the medieval university, you know, it's actually teaching some empowering things and keeping it simple. And go figure, it gets complicated with the introduction of the technical expert, because this is really the reason behind the introduction of him, is that the world is now so complex that the private citizen can't keep up. This is what Walter Lippmann talked about, the entering wedge, you know, a sort of expertness between the common citizen and the vast environment in which he's entangled. So here's the answer. There's the rise of the expert through the university.
That's unreal. It's so plain to see.
Yep. And it starts with where? Johns Hopkins. This is what we've been saying. This is Johns Hopkins and the University of Chicago.
Boy, did they play a pivotal role in COVID. I mean, they were front and center there with their little
Where were the scenarios being planned?
They were they had the fear porn death map that came from Johns Hopkins. Just the pivotal role that they played, and look at who's at the foundation of all this. I mean, unbelievable. Yep.
Johns Hopkins, you know, very influential. That's where they were doing some of those scenario plannings, like Event 201. And, you know, these were leaders of Johns Hopkins University. And Isaiah Bowman is the president of Johns Hopkins starting in 1935. And that's where the Manhattan Project gets its start. So,
oh man,
it gets, as history goes, it gets deeper and deeper and just more crazy.
Somebody died. Add a number on the TV. Add a number on the television. Put some more red on the map, and you know, across the board that, oh, we're gonna lock people down. We're gonna make them stay home. We're gonna cancel sports. So now they have to watch the news, because even the people who watch sports didn't watch the news, and now they're watching that map, and you see that map going, and it just locks it in, emotional, fear-based manipulation. And then next thing you know, people who've been friends for 35 years, you were in my wedding, we're not friends anymore. You know, you're not welcome at Thanksgiving dinner. You know, you killed grandma. I mean, my uncle actually like accused or like tried to blame my brother for like basically my grandmother's death. It was fucking insane.
And what creates all this animosity, but their reliance on the expert. They'll say, I would rather follow somebody with a degree than somebody that's on the internet. Yeah, this is a common thing that they say. This is a thought terminating cliche fallacy. It's just, it's ridiculous.
Yep.
So here's where I got the word grafted from, because they say it. American universities had grafted the German structure onto the American college model, providing in a single institution both undergraduate education and advanced graduate study and research. Thus was born the American Research University.
Wow.
That's
There
from
it
the
is.
Association of American Universities website themselves. Okay, and then so David Starr Jordan, he was involved in he wasn't the first president, but he's one of the higher ups. And it's Elliott, the president of Harvard, that actually is the president of the AAU to begin with. But David Starr Jordan was a eugenicist, like many of these men that we've shown, right? He was a member of the Bohemian Club and the University Club in San Fran. That's the place I showed you there just before you headed to San Francisco, Andy.
Yep.
It's the Bohemian Club sort of up on the hill there.
Right.
And all connected to the Century Club back in New York and Washington. So he was president of both Indiana and Stanford. He was a member of the American Philosophical Society. He was an initial board member of the Human Betterment Foundation, advocating mandatory sterilizations. So themes 100 years earlier repeating.
Absolutely.
So I've just included that page with its title to show you where we're getting some of this information from. So 5 learned societies came into existence in the 100 years following the founding of the first, the American Philosophical Society, in 1744 or 1743. And an additional 6 appeared before 1880. So 6 more in 120 years, 140 years. Then the pace picked up and 16 such societies came into existence from 1880 to 1899. And another 28 followed in the next 20 years. From 1900, there's a spelling mistake there. 5 learned societies came into existence. I think that's a source from where I just copied and pasted. In the 100 years following the founding of the first, the American... Oh, I've repeated the quote here. That's what I've done.
Hey, this is hot on the presses,
oh,
folks.
my goodness. Yeah, because I just published this. It took
exactly
me 3/4 of the day just to put the finishing touches. And so I was going through here trying to find those because I knew I had doubled up on some. And so there you go.
This is what it's like to not have a corporate team behind you.
and it doesn't hurt to repeat some of these things either. So.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So the expansion is evident in the social sciences. Economists formed their society in 1885. So there's the founding of, the economists, right? So here comes a whole new department into universities. And this is one aspect I'd like to actually investigate, this and the medical industry, because when I'm investigating this exact stuff we're going through right now, looking at the stats and how many students came over, it starts to get drowned out by medical students nearing the end of the 19th century, go figure. And economy classes, they become huge too. So we're looking at the origins of the medical industry also possibly coming from Prussia. And, we see where there's connections to the GED, General Education Board, and the Flexner brothers here later. So economists formed their society in 1885, and the rest quickly followed. Psychologists in 1892, anthropologists in 1902, political scientists in 1903, and sociologists in 1905. So they're systematically going through this, establishing each social science as a legitimate science by creating their own departments, their own journals. That's from the shaping of higher education, the formative years. By 1910, the university as an institution had taken shape. The idea of the research university was being widely accepted by 1910. The lecture method was adopted, and the specialization of the entire university system was the goal. So even how students and teachers interacted was totally overhauled. Now you think back to like Plato and Aristotle, they would just walk the grounds with their students. And it was, I think, pedantic is the phrase that they use. And it was, open learning sort of outside. So, you couldn't be compartmentalized outside, so they would have to bring you inside and establish all these different departments, right?
Right.
So here we are. The era of the division of labor in higher learning had arrived. So we see how division of labor in the factories removes the worker from his own work right? Now, instead of creating an entire object and feeling pride in whatever it is that you're building, you are only a part. You're only putting a screw in or a bolt or putting a wheel on. So this is the division of labor, and it's really taken, people from their source of labor and their earning power, just as the labor union did. So we see them admitting the same thing on an intellectual level, man. So that's unreal. Compartmentalization of education, right?
Yeah, and we see it all the time, and it's just moving towards this one world order. It doesn't even have to be a one world government. It's just like this one world order that's kind of being subtly formed, always moving towards this kind of I mean, if it caused real unity, great, but I doubt, it's not really going to. It's like a farce of what it claims to be.
Yeah. Through this series, we've proven that we've got to have better discernment than we've had up until now. So we got to be able to determine different shades of color in the spectrum. We've got to be able to determine, okay, there's a lot of people saying nice words out there, but who do we believe or who do we trust? Well, once we understand the language, I mean, you watch their actions for sure. This is why hindsight 100 years later is so great. Mm-hmm. But really in real time, once you understand the language that they're using, they just become giant red flags when you're listening to somebody speak, and you can start to really determine where they're coming from, where those ideas came from, why they're pushing society that way. So all of a sudden you are in full control of your mind.
See, right? Truth with another super chat. Thanks, man.
What is going on? You can see for yourself. You don't need a scientific expert. You don't need a YouTube channel informing you. You don't need an authority. You become your own authority. Removal of all sources, right?
It's such a foreign concept, and I know we've said it before. It's a foreign concept because they've removed it to be your own expert.
We're not saying.
And there's plenty of idiots out there that do run on bad ideas because they're trying to be their own expert,
right?
But they're doing it the wrong way because they've never been educated the right way.
Well, they didn't work on their discernment skills.
Right.
If they would have worked on their discernment skills, they'll zero in a little bit better and find a clearer conclusion.
Right.
Now we see that right now everywhere. People running around like chickens with their head cut off because they're half baked, uneducated. They half know the situation, but they don't know it in its entirety. And in that degree of vulnerability is where we get exploited. So it's very important for us to first, understand our own fallibility and then get educated. Start to inform ourselves of what the hell is going on in this world. Mm-hmm. And this 10-part series is a huge part of it, not because I'm doing it and I found it, but because of the information. This really starts to show people, starts to click together all of those sort of abstract thoughts we've had about the world, and they're starting to form together. We're starting to learn what this world is about. We're waking up, as it says, But
I hope people are going to have the reaction to this series and your work, the way a lot of heavy hitting documentaries have had over time, where it makes you feel like there's nowhere to look. Like everywhere you look, it's part of what you're talking about. There's a couple documentaries that I could point to that at one point or another, it made me feel at the end of it like something has to be done because there's no way out of this. And this does feel like that. This series so far, it's been like, holy crap! Like this is so evident once you see it that it just encompasses everything, every single aspect of our lives. Like you said, the Matrix.
Yep. That's why we ended last week with the Matrix, because that's really what he's talking about, the social contract. And that's what they're creating here, our social contract. And, there are men in history that have written amazing books about our social contract. It's just, when do we get a vote on it? We've never had a vote on that. We just get born into it.
Right.
We're implicit. I was reading somewhere that we are implicit to our social contract.
Interesting.
Right? We are responsible unwittingly is how they're explaining it. And that is absolutely true, is that we're all born into this world. And as we grow older, we start to see that it's a little bit of a shit show. And, this work for me has helped me separate myth from reality. And I find that knowing how it really happened, it becomes far less daunting. We start to see exactly how we could turn this, not some sort of mythical, what are we going to do about this? You can start to see the problems as they've entered our society. And so then we can just as easily start to remove them if we get a consensus of thought that people can, if we can get people to determine that these things are harmful and problematic for Western tradition, we can start to turn the tide.
And I think they are scared. This is why they're doing so many land grabs. There's a lot of these big tech guys like Bill Gates and others buying up so much farmland all over the West, because they know that this is where where our minds are all going. Like homesteading and gardening and taking care of yourself. These are trendy things now, not just fringe conspiracy prepper guys. It's mainstream to DIY everything.
That's interesting that it's become a popular thing to become
the counterculture. The counterculture, controlled or like manufactured or not, always bleeds into the culture, right? And the manufactured aspects, it's supposed to leak in there at a certain level in a gatekeeping kind of way,
right?
But the truth always does shine through one way or the other. And they may be micromanaging it, but I'll tell you, there's like 1 billion shows that are all dedicated to like this kind of living. So they're probably getting scared to death that it's all coming apart.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say that, in many ways we are winning. There are many places we can look to for positive reinforcements. And, we see a lot of people out there focusing on the negative things, and they become anxious and depressed and angry and all of those things. Well, we've decided to stay proactive, start to determine who our enemy is, and to get to know ourselves at the same time. And, Sun Tzu said that's the only way that you can guarantee victory, is to know thyself and know thy enemy. And so, those are the things that we try to do. And so those are the things we try to focus on.
Damn right.
So enrollment tripled from 1910 to 1940, fivefold from 1890 to 1940, quadrupled between 1940 and 1970. From 1638 to 1819, only 49 institutions of higher education, 40 of them private ones, were established in the United States. Then the pace began to step up. From 1820 to 1859, 240 more institutions were established. The next 40 years witnessed the greatest expansion, 432 colleges and universities established from 1860 to 1899. So that's through Reconstruction, really, right?
Damn.
That's, the American Revolutionary War, 1861.
Yeah.
Right.
That's
and
right at the same time.
The end of the Gilded Age is around 1880, 1890, 1900. So then the number of new institutions being established began to fall off. From 1900 to 1934, only 200 institutions opened. The closing decades of the 19th century, therefore, were the high point in the founding of four-year institutions of higher education before World War II. So you can see that really nothing after all of these early, the universities established in the 19th century, very few come after. So they've established, like you said, a network and a system that's going to work. The engine is running. Now, this is where it becomes the American model of psychology and education. It establishes, it grafts on the Prussian model of laboratories and all of that to the model based in Paris and Bologna. Mm-hmm. And it becomes its own monster, like the Thing.
Right.
So not only were relatively few institutions founded after the turn of the 20th century, but those that were founded in the 20th century have tended not to be as prestigious. The 1890s, for example, saw the establishment of Stanford, Chicago, and the California Institute of Technology. But among the 35 private institutions in the top 50 universities in the 1999 rankings by U.S. News and World Report, only 3 began college-level instruction in the 20th century, and just 1 was founded after 1900. So the 3 that are outside of that are Carnegie Institute of Technology, Rice Institute, and Brandise,
Brandise.
of course. It's like established in 1948, but it's
No
somehow been able
way.
to grab all the prestige as if it was, born the same year as Harvard. This is really where they're directing a lot of narratives today. There's the new Brandise
Interesting.
movement going.
Wow.
And
Wow,
it says,
1948. I didn't know that. Same year, the state of Israel. Wow.
yeah,
That's
same.
incredible.
Isn't 48 also the establishment of the UN, or is that 45? Either way, it's all coordinated same time.
That's
So
amazing.
it says Brandise is a special case. It was established in large measure because Jewish academics and students had long been discriminated against, because large numbers of Jewish scholars took refuge in the United States during the war, and because the Jewish community had amassed funds to found a great university.
Victim card again.
Right.
Discriminated against.
So the formative years of American higher education from about 1890 to 1940 saw some major changes in the scope of institutions, including the emergence of the research university, the demise of independent professional institutions, and the decline of independent schools of theology and denominational institutions in general. For most of the 19th century, American institutions of higher education were centers of learning, not research. So you can see that they're flipping it. They're changing it. They're changing the entire university system to one of research rather than learning. And another thing that I noticed through my research too is when you look at the shields of these universities, there was Hebrew on there, but not on the books and on the items themselves. But over the last 100 years now, there's Hebrew on that has moved off of the items. Like it's usually an open book, and it says Veritas on these shields. Well, if you look, there's been a evolution there, and the Hebrew has gone from off of the book to on it. And so I don't know what to say about that, but you can see that it's, they're kind of moving their way in closer and closer. So that began to change in the latter part of the 19th century with the founding of the Johns Hopkins University, 1876, the first dedicated research center in the United States. Clark followed, and then University of Chicago. And JHU is in there too. And so that's Granville Stanley Hall doing, creating the laboratories there. So the American Research University was to become a melding of all the components of higher education, serving a multitude of functions simultaneously. So the U.S., now this is interesting, right? So the U.S. Office of Education offered the definition that universities are institutions in which there is considerable stress on graduate instruction, which confer advanced degrees in a variety of liberal arts fields, and which have at least two professional schools that are not exclusively technological. So they are saying that to define yourself as a university, you must have available a liberal arts field. So the delineating characteristic between a college and a university is the presence of a liberal arts degree, the ability to get a master or a bachelor of arts. Now that's incredible, right? The higher learning pivots on the trivium.
Yeah, that's nuts. And just real quick, the United Nations was formed in 1945, but the United Nations formed the World Health Organization in 1948.
Okay. So a university then would appear to be a department store of higher education, combining the specialized disciplines with the broader ones of the past and adding the various professional subjects like law, medicine, dentistry, pharmacy, theology, and even business. So they're just, it's what I see as the establishment of the managerial class, and they're going to need departments and courses to take, right? And so this is really the establishment of it first. And I swear this is a lead up to the war. They knew a war was coming, because this is why they're industrializing agriculture.
Mm-hmm.
So here's another important thing that I just put in here before we started, because our research on the Rockefeller Institute and General Education Board goes back 10 years. And I just went and grabbed this because I started to notice that, the land grants of 1862 established schools in the northern area. And then after 1890, they focused down here. Now, what is in between those but the American Revolutionary War? So the Northerners, the Yankees, are establishing a schooling system in here. And then it's only after they defeat the South do they get down here and start to establish the schooling here. And then in 1994, they establish it all up here for the Native American. And it's all in the name of giving education to everyone, regardless of sex, creed, or color, I think is the term that they say.
What heroes?
Right. So that's a very interesting point, that this kind of coincides with the American Revolutionary War, which makes me want to really investigate the American Civil War or the American Revolutionary War really bad, because this is showing maybe that because they were victors, then they started to establish their system down in the South. And what does that mean for the Confederates? What were they defending exactly?
Yeah, what's really going on?
Were they defending our traditions and values, and were they recognizing the harm that, this new education was going to bring to America? I don't know. I'm just speculating, but there's more to the American Revolutionary War than mainstream history tells us. So medical schools were increasingly vulnerable in the late 19th century with the advent of stricter state licensing, designed in part to replace the art of healing with science. So all of these people running around, using herbs and plants were on the way out, and on the way in was going to be a new scientific medical model. Their numbers thinned further in the wake of a 1910 Carnegie Commission report known as the Flexner Report. So this is the establishment of the medical industry when you're talking about that report. It's just like the Balfour Declaration to Israel. It's the founding document. So after its author, Abraham Flexner, which severely criticized many of the 155 medical colleges in the United States and Canada. So him and his crew went around and investigated all of the so-called medical institutions in the United States and Canada and started to determine which ones were worthy and which ones weren't.
At the behest of the Rockefellers, right?
Yep. Getting paid the whole time by Rockefeller, the guy that's bringing in the new version. So thus the university came to combine the features of a department store, an integrated knowledge production factory, and a brand name. This is a corporation. It's really what they are. It's economic, not intellectual or learning purposes. So as universities emerged as a major research centers and the classical curriculum of liberal arts colleges gave way to a more modern one, higher education became secularized. The change took place in a variety of ways. Many transformed themselves into non-sectarian liberal arts colleges. Others merged with universities to become non-denominational divinity schools, and many just simply vanished. We look at all of the things that are turning into one today, right? Like media is one world of everything. And so we see, education kind of the same thing, just boiling down to one way. So the demise in denominational institutions that train ministers was furthered by the decreased relative demand for their services. The ratio of the average salary of Methodist and congregational ministers to that of all wage earners in manufacturing fell from 1.81 to 8 in 1892 to 1.68 in 1900. So another part of the secularization of colleges was due to the triumph of the scientific method and other aspects of secular thought. They were incompatible with religious doctrine. But make no mistake that there's a definite Christian missionary aspect to all of this. They are working in cahoots as well. There's a paralleling of Christian missionary work and the education of the ignorant or the dumb, and the feeding of the hungry and the housing of the poor. It's all still the same kind of thing. And as we showed in whatever part that was, the dispensationalists and the social gospel, these are Christian socialists that are in cahoots, and he marries Brandise's daughter, the founder of the social gospel. So teacher training institutions, which before 1940 were often normal schools with a 2-year curriculum, later became part of state universities. The share of total enrollments accounted for by publicly controlled institutions reaches 78%. The application of the scientific method and the increased division of labor and the specialization in higher education disproportionately benefited certain types of institutions. Those that had access to research funds were initially large and diverse, were non-sectarian, and had reputation and a long purse. we're in the best position to prosper from the changes. Now that is Rockefeller foundations. Those are 501(c)s they're talking about. So more public sector institutions than private sector ones were so situated and thus flourished and expanded in the wake of the changes to the structure of knowledge that shook higher education from around 1880 to 1910. Now that era right there, 1880 to 1910, is considered the new manifest destiny. Okay, and this is where I think manifest destiny, I mean, obviously there are, a lot of dead bodies in the wake of manifest destiny when we're just talking about the native Indian here in North America.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But 1880 to 1910 is considered the new manifest destiny. This is the more modern. We start to see the names that we've been researching here involved in this the new manifest destiny movement. So it's, right at the end of the Gilded Age and into this 20th century of, the American 20th century. So, of course, certain private institutions also gained from the technological changes that affected higher education at the start of the formative period. Some were research and graduate institutions prior to the changes at the turn of the century, like Hopkins and Chicago. So they're even mentioning those universities specifically.
Wow.
So here's a map of the land grant colleges and universities that I have at the very top. It's just not with a transparent background.
Mm.
And what I want to sort of draw everybody's attention to is just, this is the establishment of what we see later with the creation of the nodes of the internet, right? Whereas the first nodes of the internet, but the established, prestigious, old traditional universities. So, we're seeing the early rudimentary beginnings of a comprehensive mind control. And how much do these guys know in the 1880s about some future, television or screen that glows in your house that's able, who knows?
Right.
We know that H.G. Wells wrote a book about it, The World Brain, whenever that was significantly after this. So we're not sure.
And he's an interesting character as well.
Yeah. And so we're not sure how much of this is in their brains way back in the day in the pioneers, but we're seeing that, it's been stretched to its furthest imagination here in the year 2024.
Oh, yes.
So between 1909 and today, AAU has grown slowly but steadily to the point where it now comprises 62 universities, still roughly half public and half private. Among the members are the two Canadian universities added in 1926, McGill and University of Toronto. Go figure. Starting in 1914, because that's Montreal and Toronto.
Mm-hmm.
And McGill is, the center of MK Ultra and probably the University of Toronto too. So starting in 1914 and for many years afterwards, the association functioned in no small part as an accreditation agency. Almost as soon as AAU was founded, German universities began using membership in AAU as their measure of quality for graduate school admissions. So they're in Germany, they want to bring students over, but they have to now be accredited through the AAU. And who established the AAU again? But the guys that went over to Prussia and learned from them this system. So this era from 1890 to 1910 is considered by many historians as the new manifest destiny. Those who guided AAU in those early years included future U.S. President Woodrow Wilson, then president of Princeton, who presided over the association's 1910 conference. Starting in the late 1930s and ever since, the association has been increasingly focused on the relationship between higher education and the federal government. So this is fascist. We're talking public-private partnerships again.
Yeah.
So the definition of corporatism, Mussolini's fascism, before 1917, when they create the War Industries Board and get right serious about it. So the university system subsidized by the federal government starting, and that's, obviously this funding has happened, as we're showing here, a lot earlier than that. I'm just taking this quote. And so it says the university system subsidized by the federal government starting with Lyndon B. Johnson's Higher Education Act of 1965. And that is all part of Johnson's The Great Society presidential campaign platform, right? And what is that? A direct reference to, but Graham Wallace's book, written 1913, that famous year, 1913, 1914.
Right.
And dedicated to who? But the father of American modern journalism, Walter Lippmann.
Walter Lippmann, yes.
Who, as a political philosopher and probably one of the more dominant society influencers, used that phrase, the Great Society, throughout his entire career that spanned 60 years. I think he had one of the longest syndicated columns called Today and Tomorrow. So it's, again, progressive language because there's no talk of yesterday, right?
Right.
They don't want to talk about yesterday. They're going to just apply Comte's positivism, and we're moving forward. We are positive. It's like determinism as well. We're positive. We're determined that our ends are going to justify the means. Stop asking us about the mess. In the end, you'll thank us. The future will be perfect. So a liberal arts department and the awarding of Bachelor and Master of Arts degrees are necessary to university designation, meaning the liberal arts are the key difference between the definition of a university and a college. To be clear, there were and still are liberal art colleges, but most were either subsumed into the local university or disappeared altogether on purpose. If any exist today, they are generally private institutions and within the Association of American State Colleges and Universities, what we mentioned earlier. It's an affiliated organization. So up until the Prussian historical schools' influence, universities taught hard sciences, the classics, Greek, and Latin, and it was all based around the 7 liberal arts: grammar, logic, rhetoric, arithmetic, geometry, music, astronomy. So that's where we leave this one. And, we're going to pick it up in week 9 on exactly what this trivium is, exactly what these liberal arts are, and why they moved them just out of reach of most people. And they really just gave it to those that proved themselves to be, Atlanticists in their worldview, encouraging or, fans of Britain and America being together as Anglophiles, or the Occidental sort of idea, as long as they have all of these. And, they're carriers of the white man's burden that inspired Cecil Rhodes too, 1902. So it's really this noble lie told through an unattainable ideal. This is how they get the management class to think that they're doing something great for society. And what is that really but utilitarianism as well? So, they're getting it over on us, the 80%, but they're also getting it over on the 20%. And Chomsky stated that the 20% managerial class has to be way more brainwashed than we do.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I found that research just extraordinary. We show the further development of the internet. The first ever internet transmission was from Stanford Research Institute to a moving van, right? There was a van just driving around Southern California, and they were establishing the internet from Stanford Research Institute. You can see, if you look in on those diagrams, MIT and all of these universities that we're talking about are affiliated with military nodes. Fort Bragg, you see there, ARPA, Pentagon, right? So it's really a network of higher intelligence, and the commonality or the common denominator is a liberal arts degree.
Yeah, it's nuts. I can't wait to get into the trivium.
Or a Bachelor of Science too, right? But
Absolutely.
It's generally the Master of Arts degree that is bestowed upon those that are going to be the most effective managerial classes, because this is a co-opting of the intelligent creatives. And so it's a brain drain on the 80%, and they're putting the smartest people into that 20% managerial class. So at the same time, they're causing a brain drain in the general mass. They are using that intelligence for their own benefit. And, these people are working against their own self-interest. But you won't be able to tell them that.
No. Well, this has been awesome. Andy, do you have anything to add?
Any final thoughts, guys?
Yeah.
Incredible stuff, as always. Just the depth of it all has been, 8 parts now. I followed pretty closely um, every week, and it's just I'm really glad to be back, be a part of this one. Look forward to many more. It's just it's fascinating to see the development and to just see how, I mean, people in 2024 are still being manipulated by these things. There's people are
Mhm.
coming out to dinner and still wearing masks in
Yeah,
their car,
That's crazy, dude.
driving by
it's
themselves, and
nuts.
you
Still
know,
seeing it.
500, 450 pound people that are obese and diabetic, and they're coming to the restaurant and drinking 3 4 sodas and eating fried chicken wings and pizza, and they want plastic silverware and drinks and to-go cups, but they sit down and take their masks off and eat dinner for 2 hours. I
Right.
mean,
Cardboard straws, it's all good for them.
you know, it's just amazing to me how our minds do get molded, and to see Duane kind of just laying it out here. Um,
How
with
effective their propaganda has been, hey?
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
unreal.
very. It's
And
uh,
how they did it. It's a complete network. And so
it takes time too. It's just this
maybe,
low, it's this gradualism, this incrementalism, over
yeah,
time, and just a steady diet of like dumbing down and and poisoning people too, with the food and the thoughts and um, ideas and actual like vaccines, all these things that like we're doped up, we're dumbed down, we're docile, we're distracted, we're selfish, asleep, sedated, it's just
yep.
a lot of us are coming out of that now, and we're seeing a lot of good things. So I'm
There's definitely a movement of people waking up to all this. There's no doubt.
there's a lot of good stuff taking place, and it's just kind of where a big concern of mine is with free speech right now. Like where things are going, where like we might not even be able to speak or criticize a certain group of people.
Right.
And I'm talking to specific people. It doesn't even matter. Like you can't. There's like laws being passed about being able to criticize the state of Israel or Jews, or there's
Yeah.
crazy shit happening
Well,
right now. But
hey, the first university to stop the pro-Palestinian protests on campuses was
Brandise, right?
Brandise.
Yeah.
Yeah, dude.
So you can see that it's continued. I mean,
Yeah.
there's a 500 million other Semites in that region, but we never talk about them. Just like all we ever talk about is capitalism and not free market laissez-faire. It's the
Mm.
same trick that they use, just a trick of language.
It's also like there's many, many, many forms of voting. And I'm not saying there's voting in this country that matters at this point, but there's different forms of voting. There's different forms of governments that aren't even being utilized, that have been worked out here and there. It's just like we have this, like you said, like we've been kind of compartmentalized, and
For sure.
this scientific expert mentality that we've grown up with all around us has just really put fences up everywhere. It's literal gatekeeping. It's the name
Hmm.
of the game, and
Hmm.
it sells us this. Like you get the flat Earth community, right? They talk about being encapsulated in an ice wall of some sort, and like
Right.
the rest of the world is out there and there's more land and stuff like that, right?
Hmm.
Well, it's kind of like that even just within this system that we're talking about,
Sure.
because it's like they do create this matrix, this kind of limited hangout, false reality around us, and say they normalize things that would never be normal, right? And it
Hmm.
just kind of it makes the
Perception
world smaller
management.
and smaller. Perception management, my
you
friend.
know it's just like, I
um
mean, who knows what's actually out there. Most people don't leave the place that they're born. A lot of people
Right.
don't leave the place they're born. People are so poor and growing up in this world. Like, I mean, there's so many people that I know that, like, if they haven't left their small area, like they definitely haven't left their state. they haven't, if they haven't left, maybe they left the state, but they haven't left the country,
Mhm.
like let alone like been to the other side of the
Right.
world and seen, I mean, so they could literally, anything could be possible, like anything could be out there.
Mhm.
Who really knows, right? And it's like, they show us so much shit, and like people that literally that I know that have like never left the country or their small area because they were so poor, or like so, just
Yeah,
had
no
no interest,
opportunity.
had no opportunity or interest or whatever.
Mhm.
Like think that they like know so much about the world, and it's just,
Mhm.
it blows my mind. Like
Oh
we
I
yeah.
have
just
a friend
don't,
like that.
we we don't, we all do. I mean, I
Mhm.
bet so many of us do. And it's just like to
They've never
see,
been they've never been on a vacation. They've never been outside of my province of British Columbia.
yeah.
But when we get into debates about things beyond our horizons, they know more than me. Why? Because of the scientific expert. So when you
Mhm.
talk about
Right.
a prison for your mind or a
Yeah.
prison built with no walls, what would that be but an intellectual prison?
That you walk right into
Yeah,
Right.
willingly.
willingly. Can't wait. You're proud to tell your parents that you've got a degree or you're going to college. This is one of the things that your parents just love to hear. This
They
is
celebrated so
And
much,
why?
dude.
Not because
Spend
they
so
want
much
you to
money.
be indoctrinated, but because they want you to be, they have the illusion that this is your security too. And this is
Mhm.
how it should be. And this is what's going to make you okay when you grow up
Yeah,
and all this.
Yeah.
yeah.
It's,
It's
yeah.
your ticket to success. I mean, it's like I said in the beginning, I'm still paying today. I owe forty thousand
Right.
dollars. I've been
Right.
paying for 16 years, and
That's
you know,
incredible, man. That kind of thing
um,
should not be allowed.
and
You've
if I
paid
It's
if I
enough out of your premium,
Well,
I
right?
the
mean,
So,
problem is
if
they will
I
come up with alternatives, and it's they will come up with the
yeah,
alternatives to
like,
this problem.
right,
They will create a
right,
solution like,
right.
all these online universities and
yeah,
things like that. Probably some good ideas in there too, but at the same
Mhm.
time, who will it be? It's unreal. They
it's
just
crazy, but like it's
whichever,
like I'm just an average guy,
it's
but I'm like
Leninism.
I'm struggling financially, and it's like
Mhm.
I'm not doing anything in my field. I mean, granted, I was bullied out of the industry. I kind of made a moral choice to step out of corporations and stuff like that. And now I'm like bartending and serving just to like until I can figure out what I actually want to do with my life,
Right.
but it's like to be a person like me, there's so many people like me who are like struggling financially and like
More and
made
more
these
every day, man.
decisions 20 plus years ago, when like we had no idea what the fuck we were doing, but that's what we were told, was that this was like the best option, this was like the only option, this was like, like, I mean, we had trade schools and tech schools and stuff like that, but it was like those were shunned and shit like that too. And it was like, oh, you have to go to a university. And it was like the brainwashing, and like the grooming to get people to go and that on that path is just fucking
Mhm.
insane, dude. And I'm still
Yeah.
dealing with it 20,
Yeah.
16 years since I graduated in 2008. Like that's fucking insane. Oh yeah, and for the fucking 100th time, didn't know that the fucking Federal Reserve was
Right.
fucking federal or not
Yeah.
federal and has no fucking reserves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, are you kidding me? The creature
And
from Jekyll Island strikes again.
that's good thing to bring up because I wanted to sort of make a summation of where we are. And the
Believe me.
Federal Reserve was created by Louis Brandeis. He's the architect of the new freedom. That was part one in this series. As we're coming close to the end now, people should be really starting to see what's coming into vision, what I'm trying to show you. Louis Brandeis, we went through 8 parts or 7 parts with him because he is really the architect of our modern day social contract, our matrix, our invisible prison for the mind, prison without walls. He's really the foundational character, and that we covered in part 2, the principles of scientific management. He's the coiner of the term scientific management.
Yeah, man.
He's establishing your 8-hour day, 5-day a week work schedule through the protocol of peace. It's legislated across the nation. So we wake up to an alarm clock and we do our 8 hours a day. Well, this is Louis Brandise really helped establish this. He's a U.S. Supreme Court justice. And then we show how he's the international leader of Zionism at the same time that he's the most trusted personal advisor to the U.S. president. He's a father of the progressive movement, but he's also shaping and steering the real founder, who they call the founder of Zionism, a dispensational Christian, to sort of motivate American Christians to get behind the idea of a Jewish homeland. And the social gospel movement is, the founder of that marries Brandise's daughter, and today they're still passing legislation that is progressive, and we know of another great grandson of Brandise who's the head of the alliance of all of the churches. So it just goes on and on. And so then,
and he's more loyal to a foreign country than the country that he basically lived in his entire life.
For sure.
And
shaped.
We're not going to be able to basically question that pretty soon, right?
Yep.
Dual loyalty, this notion of dual loyalty and with people today. We talked about this the last time I was on, but it was like, I mean, Duane, the country that you live in, you already can't question the scope and scale of the Holocaust. And that's been since, I don't even know how long that's been in Canada, but that's what's happening. They're trying to do that here in America, like where literally you cannot question any aspect of that event as well. You can't question dual loyalty, even when these people make it so obvious. Specific people in government. We brought up the chart last time. Anthony Blinken, Janet Yellen, people that are unelected by us, right? I mean, not that I vote anyways, because it's ridiculous. But, these are unelected people. They're appointed. And so we have no say in it. And then they make decisions like they say, oh, America can afford to fight 2 wars. And it's okay that we do it. It's okay that we fight 2 wars and we can afford it, basically. And then you find out both of those people support Zionism and support the state of Israel. And you can't be loyal to 2 different countries that have different interests. You just can't. Right. It's not a thing,
And we've shown that Louis Brandeis, really popularized the idea of dual loyalty through his buddy Horace W. Kalin, who kind of pioneered the idea. But prior to Brandeis being elected the chairman of International Zionism, Kalin gets him to flip on his point of view of hyphenated Americans, that Brandeis looked disparagingly at these people that weren't assimilating into America, and they were keeping their traditional name from Europe too with their new American name. And he forever talked disparagingly of these people, then overnight just flipped. And that was the night before he was elected, the chairman of the Executive Provisional Committee on General Zionist Affairs, which was Herzl's headquarters moved from Berlin. They had to get it out of there. Same things were happening in World War II that we've covered. So, he's establishing and making popular dual loyalty. He's making it a thing.
Right.
And so that is actually inspiring Christians to get behind this idea for a Jewish homeland in Palestine. It's really, a huge aspect to the creation of Israel that, nobody talks about. And yes, Israel was created in 1948 officially, but really 1917 is the year that the Balfour Declaration is created. That's the year that all of the drafts of the Balfour Declaration is going through Brandeis's hands while he's in David Lloyd George, the Prime Minister of Britain, in his apartment in Paris during the Paris Peace Conference with Balfour. And they're doing cables. And they're first of all, Rothschild and Brandise want that one sentence out of there, it clearly being understood that nothing shall be done to prejudice the civil and religious rights of the already existing people there. They fought over that exact sentence.
Right.
And Brandise and them didn't want it in, but it was in the end. And so today I'm thankful because we can show the contradiction. We can, when somebody like Benjamin Netanyahu talks about just total 100% victory. Well, that's a far cry from it being clearly understood that nothing shall be done to prejudice those people.
Right.
So it's a huge glaring contradiction that if we show the general public, even the asleep, I know that they are all hopped up on Israeli propaganda right now, but you show that contradiction to people and it makes you think, so dual loyalty, all of these things you're talking about, it's Brandise at the bottom of it. It's an amazing thing.
Yeah, Balfour's been in the news recently too, because that painting got vandalized, and all these people with like great shows, I don't even know, some of these shows out there, they're talking about Balfour, and they're like, there's not one single mention of Brandise anywhere. Like, and they're talking formation of Israel, Balfour Declaration, and all over Twitter. Actually, it was like trending on Twitter, and all these people talking about Balfour, that document being like the sole thing that created the state of Israel. And I mean, Brandise's name is nowhere to be found. Like you've been saying throughout this series, that he's just like, for some reason, just goes completely unnoticed.
So what do you think the reasoning is behind the video that I saw that you're talking about, where it's a girl and she's just shredding this painting of Balfour at Oxford?
Right. To place further blame on Balfour, and to like put Brandise to shield him even more, perhaps.
Well, are they looking at that? Are the television watchers, that neoliberal section of our population, looking at that as like a travesty? Are they saying, oh my goodness, we shouldn't be soiling the great name of Balfour? Is that how the mainstream is looking at it? Because I could see that would be then a catalyst to get people to support Israel, right?
Also, that's a tricky one too, because usually that side of the media will side with the environmentalists, and not blame anyone for doing it. But this time, it's this painting in particular. So
I'm going to have to go look. And Chrystia Freeland, the foreign minister here in Canada, has her own oil painting in there too. I'd like to take a knife to.
It's interesting because it reminds me of Gottlieb and Huxley, where like Gottlieb gets all the attention in all the counterculture circles, and not just any counterculture circles, just the weirdos among us, and me included, that go deep enough to like figure out who was in charge of MK Ultra and all this. It's always Gottlieb is the face on it. I'm sure there'll be
the only name not redacted
soon enough, right? So that's well, fair enough. But that's right.
But that's why I agree with you. That's why it wasn't redacted, because they can't put Huxley in there.
Right, exactly. And this is the same goes here with Brandise.
I agree.
All Balfour, or on any conspiracy channel, you're going to see Rothschild and he's dead now, thank God. And
Taylorism, right? Yep. Scientific management. It's Frederick Winslow Taylor,
right? You see Brandise nowhere.
Brandise.
You see Brandise nowhere. You see Walter Lippmann only. You see him, but only in he's everywhere in the sense, But then there's Norbert Wiener, who we've, that right there. This like clusterfuck of genius assholes is That's amazing.
Intelligent creatives. That's another child protege. You can see that they groomed him too, and that's cybernetics.
Cybernetics, which is the same definition as government. People remember that government and cybernetics, same thing.
To control the subverters and the intruders. My favorite. I mean, the three of us have gone at length about this, because these all these movers and shakers, these people that have like really moved the needle with these like with our big societal changes, have been Jewish, and they don't have the best interest of the host nation at heart. They don't.
No.
They just they don't, and it's just insane to see the shit that's being pushed through Hollywood. I just watched some ridiculous movie the other day, like Andy, I watched Righteous Gemstones, by the way. Oh my god. Just to lighten it up a little.
I'm writing it down.
You have to check
ridiculous,
it out.
Dude. Utterly ridiculous about these like mega
I'm all 3
church.
seasons in, and like they're
I
covering
binge
every
watched it,
trope, dude. Yeah.
because I
Oh,
haven't been
wow. Okay.
sleeping. You know, I told you guys like I've
Yeah,
been
yeah.
struggling with
Yeah.
my health and stuff. So like I'm up in the middle of the night, can't fucking sleep, and I'm watching this shit, and it's like based on this like mega church pastor family, and like they're the worst people ever, and like they just raise so much money through this church, and they just put on a certain persona on the face, you know, that gets presented to these to the people, and then you know behind the scenes is just like this completely like just
Nightmare.
I mean the complete opposite of righteous, you know, like I
Right.
mean every step of the way. And it was just like, but I mean to see some of the shit just that like it's coming out of Hollywood, Netflix,
Well, also,
is
yeah,
so
it's like
asinine and insane and
there's one layer of
debasing.
what the writers are saying in the show itself, and then there's what the writers are saying through the show to people. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
right.
And it's really interesting to see. Of course, you can do that pretty much with every show at this point.
Right, of course.
Yeah.
Like this is what they wanted you to see, and this is what's really being pushed. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
One last thing that I want to say is that I was having a pretty good conversation earlier today with somebody on Facebook that contacted me, and they're from Louisville, Kentucky.
Mm,
This is where Brandise landed, and
nice.
he contacted me and showed me sort of the influence that Brandise and Flexner have in and around Louisville, because this is where the Flexners landed too. So there's big giant banners of Louis Brandise on the side of buildings in Louisville, Kentucky, he showed me, and the streets in and around the medical area of Louisville is, you know, it's Flexner Road or Flexner Drive. So
Oh, shit.
yeah, you can see
Wait,
that they're
Is that where
they're
we
big
got
names in Louisville.
Louisville? Yeah, is that where we got this
Pardon?
name Louisville from Louis?
I don't know, but I found it funny that he
Brandeis?
comes from Brandise on the Elbe and decides to land in Louisville, of all places, Kentucky,
Right.
the
Oh,
city of
man.
Louis.
I bet
That's-
I bet that is part of
It-
like
it
the
could
name.
be.
Wow.
But the
Could be.
Brandise is there's a
Louisville.
decade later, a whole other group of Brandise comes to Omaha, and they establish department stores, so like a famous department store there. And the 28 family members go with the Brandises when they leave. You know, Adolf, Louis's father, when he comes to America with the Rothschild agent that we've already covered, there's 28 other family members with him. And I haven't done a ton of research into this to see what they were doing or where they're going, but I bet you it's interesting.
It's vast, and yeah, that'll be like 3 or 4 more series that we'll
Right.
get into.
3 or
throughout the
4 more years, we'll get there.
Oh yeah, exactly. I want to connect all these, like every topic
Sure.
of interest. I want to link back to these experts from now on.
Yeah.
But
Real quick before we end it.
Okay.
I just checked my screen. I sent a picture. This billboard around the corner from my house right now.
What?
Premiering this Thursday.
Is that a boat?
9/11. Hold your breath. This is a billboard like literally right around the corner from my house. Premiering this Thursday, March
Oh.
14th.
911.
It's just called 9/11, and it says "Hold your breath." These billboards are all over Charlotte. Like,
So what's the
fuck?
plot line? The ship
I
sinking, it looks like.
haven't actually. Yeah, that's a ship sinking.
Which is
So they
crazy
must be
because
trapped underneath there.
didn't this just happen to a cruise liner like 2 weeks ago, with a really horrible storm, where
I
so a
don't know,
whole cruise ship
but-
was like on its side and people were getting rescued, people were dying and shit. It was crazy. Yeah,
Do you
I was
call
just like
911
that.
when your ship's going down?
I don't know. That's a weird fucking billboard.
Yeah, right around the corner.
Watch
from
the
my house.
waters, guys. Watch the
Right.
water.
Right.
They're fucking crazy, dude. These people. That's all I know, man. The last election year didn't go too well for us. So head on the swivel out there.
Hey, so listen, shout out to everybody who stuck around with us and everybody that supports the deep share. Really appreciate it. Liz Elms, by the way, thank you again for the super chat. All 3 of you
man.
guys. This is awesome.
Hey, Liz.
Really
Thanks for your
appreciate.
support.
Hell yeah, and everybody's learning so much. Everybody's appreciating the work that you're bringing us, Duane. Seriously.
I'm glad
And,
Gerard was here this week, man.
Hell yeah, man. Good to see you, Andy.
Good to be
Glad
back.
to have you here, man. I'm glad to have another person with me being like awestruck with some of the shit that Dwayne's dropping. So it's not just me going, oh my God.
I really
Yeah.
just hope that it's getting through. I hope I'm doing a decent enough job to keep it simple. I'm hoping that there are people out there that it's really starting to hit home for them, because it should be by now.
I think it is. I'm sure it is. I see it. I
Yeah.
hear it. People are telling me all the time how much they love this series.
So next week, we may do the international. We may just continue with this aspect and show how this spreads internationally, and then do the trivium to conclude it. Or we
sure.
may do the trivium first. I'm not sure how I'm going to do it, but I've got a video already in the bucket here,
Nice.
ready to be published. It's about 20 minutes, and it's about the Paris Peace Conference and how the scientific expert established international rule of law around the world. So,
And by the
look
way,
forward to
if
that.
when we get done with this 10-parter, if there is extra things to discuss, we can always do more
Sure.
gatherings. We may have
Yeah.
to skip a week, take a break, let
right.
people digest a little
Yep.
bit, but gladly do some bonus episodes with you guys, get into some deeper, kind of go off script a little bit in those, I think people would love that. And we can have it so people can join us and ask questions and all that kind of stuff too.
Well, I would say that the origins of economics, the origins of history, and the origins of our medical industry, all coming out of Prussia, still have to be investigated. So those are
There's a lot
major
more
ones.
pieces.
That medical industry is something that we all will quote from and talk about and know, but it's again one of those things that I'm sure that once I get in there and start looking around, there'll be some surprising aspects to it.
Right.
But it seems to all be coming from Prussia too. So.
Yeah, and again, I sound like a broken record at this point, but we are totally digging into Prussia and beyond, back into time at some point, because I want to know where Prussia, I just want to get closer. Like, we're bridging our work together from this ancient time period to our recent history. And I think that's where a lot of confusion comes from, and a lot of misunderstanding. And I really can't wait to just keep doing this more and more.
Yeah. And I like the idea of maybe sort of from the enlightened absolutists, the Sweden Prussian influence. That's as far back as I've gone. I'd love to start there and go further back and keep going until I meet your research and we have something foundational to offer.
I think
that would be incredible.
I think I have a couple other interested parties that would do well in a conversation about those topics as well. By the way, shout out to Thor. Glad you got here. But yeah, everyone, this has been awesome. Andy, Duane, as always, this has been great having you guys.
Thanks for having me, buddy. Thanks for having me.
And yeah, we'll see you next week, same time for part 9. And yeah, love you all. Take it easy.
Cool.